I mean, I guess most vegans would agree that humans are not like that non-human animals are not morally on the same level as humans, so that even humans have at least a little bit more moral value. But if we put this aside, right, and if we just take an extreme vegan position where humans and non-human animals have the same moral value, then we could just go through a number of trolley problems that just involves humans, and then ask us why doesn't this not have then the same implication for animals, right? So, for instance, if you ask the question, so you have a group of people, that group of people is in the process of killing another group of people, and you could press a button and then prevent that by killing the aggressors, would you do that or not? So what would be your position on that?
Well, so hold on a second. Someone's in trouble.
I can hear, yeah.
The vegan police are coming. So basically, if someone had a metaethical view like you described, right, I could see that being a logical consequence. But my sort of contention with that is that not all vegans have that metaethical view, if that makes sense. So, like, yes, let's say someone's a utilitarian, and yes, let's say that they would make a distinction between humans and animals, so that, like, there are utilitarian reasons to keep humans alive. Therefore, we wouldn't kill humans who are predators, but then there would be a reason to kill predators for the well-being of wild animal life. That seems to me to be logical. You can make a consistent argument about something like that, right? And as a logical consequence of that type of veganism, I wouldn't really object. There are vegans who make that very argument, that we should be culling predators. However, like I said before, I don't think that's true of veganism, in part because the moral considerations for veganism are really different depending on the vegan. Like, for example, in my case, I'm a virtue ethicist, so trolley problems wouldn't really be something I would engage with on the topic, and I would have different reasons for not culling predators and have different approaches for managing wild animal suffering, or what's called the wild predation problem. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I think there are of course practical limitations to killing all predators, and it would just be interesting, to abstract from these practical limitations and look at hypothetical examples where these practical limitations don't exist, and then just see, where the line of implication stops, right? So, what would you do in situation X? What would you do in situation Y? And at what point is there no longer a symmetry such that you wouldn't just press a button to instantly kill all predator animals? Or maybe you would. Would you kill a button to instantly kill all predator animals painlessly?
No.
You wouldn't. Okay. Yeah.
No.
So,
I mean, because my position is, I don't grant some of the problems of suffering that a utilitarian does, or a negative utilitarian does. I actually think suffering is a valuable part of life. It's a valuable part of my life. I also have views about sovereignty of forests, for example. I take sort of a political theory view where you have sovereign nations, and those sovereign nations means that we have certain duties towards those nations, etc. I take a view of that with wildlife, with forests, with oceans. I see those as a type of sovereign area. And so I have certain duties for how I treat wild animals, which means I'm not able to just go in there and interact and do whatever I want with the animals.
Okay, I mean, yeah, you would have to elaborate on that specific view. But maybe it's not even a good idea to talk about your specific view, because I can see that there's always, of course, some ethical position for which this is not entailed, right? So it might be
Yeah.
more interesting to think about what your average Joe, your average vegan Joe would think about this, and whether this makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good framing to maybe look at like a general sort of broad vegans. What would be the majority view of vegans, not necessarily like the universal view of vegans. I think that would be a fine way to frame that's changed my mind. So just to highlight it for the audience listening and for you, my task would be to change your mind that the majority of vegans would not be logically implicated in killing predators, correct?
Yeah, but maybe we make this a little bit weaker. So because I agree that the practicality of killing predator animals, this is a whole other question. So the question is, are they logically committed to pressing the button that painlessly kills all predator animals? Is this fine, or do you think this is too hard for you
If
too hard a
logically,
task?
I think it might. It seems to me like that makes it stronger rather than weaker. Like if the goal was to make it weaker, hold on a second.
Weaker for me, stronger from your perspective. It's a weaker position, right? The position is weaker on my view.
Can you elaborate on how it's weaker? Because I guess
because everybody that would be willing to actually go out with a shovel and kill all predator animals would certainly be willing to press a button to do that painlessly, but not everybody who would press the button would go out with the shovel. So, you know what I mean? So it's a weaker claim. It's a much stronger claim.
weaker than a practical claim. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And so you're saying that most vegans would have to do that, right?
They would have to press the button, yeah.
I don't see why that's the case. Why they would have to press the button. Like, for example,
yeah.
I think most people's. I think it's more rare to be a utilitarian than it is to be sort of deontological or a virtue ethicist, for example. And I think that both the deontologist and virtue ethicist leaning vegan is not going to really think they should press the button. It's only those people who are like viewing it based on well-being and kind of a hedonic calculus that are going to feel the urge to press that button.
I mean, most people have no idea about their normative ethical views. I think most people
most vegans do, though. I think they're vegan because they've considered. I think most vegans have considered their ethics, and it's because they considered it that they went vegan in the first place.
I think this is a small subset. So I know this is the people that you are around, like these philosophy people who then looked at the logical entailment of their ethical views. But I think most people are just they don't like if other sentient beings suffer. They have empathy, and then they realize at some point, hey, these animals in the cages, they just suffer as I suffer, and so I wanna prevent that.
Right, but they wouldn't pull the trigger on all humans. So I don't see why those people
no, they
who
wouldn't.
wouldn't. Right, so I don't see why they would pull the trigger on all animals too. Like most vegans, I think, who are even the ones who haven't really considered their normative ethics, to me it seems like they're really just going to be treating it like they would a human. Like, I wouldn't do this to a human. Why would I do it to an animal? I can't find a good reason, like a good explanation either way. And if they wouldn't pull the button for all humans, they wouldn't pull the button for all animals. That's sort of like a primitive way that some vegans kind of measure things.
But why would they pull the button on all humans? First of all, you're not pulling the button on all animals, only on specific animals. And so you could say, would they pull the button on humans that would that could never possibly be convinced not to harm animals, for instance. And here I'm not so sure anymore if not some vegans would pull the button here.
Yeah, I guess we're sort of speculating on that, right? Like, my intuition is that they wouldn't consider killing an animal worthy of execution, right?
Yeah, but that is strange to me, right? Because and I think maybe we can. Have you watched the discussion? Are you aware with the hypothetical that Vegan Gains gave with the Nazis and the Jews?
No, I mean, I heard
Okay.
him start talking about it, but like, I don't really think Vegan Gains is very compelling.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I agree with you, but just this discussion between the two guys, I thought he didn't do too bad. So the question is basically, would you, in the case of the Holocaust, for example, would you kill the Nazis to prevent the Nazis to kill the Jews? And I think here most people would agree that this is morally justified and this is something we should do. Would you agree?
Okay, well, I think there's a flaw with the hypothetical.
Yeah, I
One,
mean, we can talk about whether this then translates to or how this, what are the symmetries then
well,
and
okay, but
what
the
breaks down.
question,
But would you
but
agree first that
hold
this is the case?
okay, if I will grant that given the way it was presented by a sophist and they didn't have the skills to get around the sophistry, that yes, they might pull the trigger, but that's a different question than would the vegans be logically implicated in pulling the trigger? Like, that's answering the question of would a vegan who didn't know how to handle a sophist pull the trigger? So, like, what I think is a better
Who's the
analogy,
sophist here? Who's the
vegan
sophist? Am I?
gains.
Oh, okay.
Not
But
you, vegan gains. Yeah.
okay, no, but it's just I think what I would like to do in the conversation, what I think would help me is just start from one example where maybe could agree that most people would press the button or whatever, and then change things in a hypothetical and see where it breaks down on your view, and then for you to tell me what is the symmetry breaker, if this is fine with you.
Right. Okay. But going to this like example, right, of Germany versus
Yeah.
those people that Germany killed. What's the number of Nazis being killed? Because it seems like they're just sort of doing this like utilitarian calculus, and they assume that there are less of one versus the other. But like, let's
No, there are more Nazis
every
than
human
Jews.
because yeah, I think there are way more Nazis than there were Jews.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah, they
question
would
is,
kill.
would it justify killing more people? And Vegan Gains does not do this calculus. He's saying even though there are more Germans than Jews, or sorry, Jews were also Germans, but more Nazis than Jews, this would still, because of these rights violations that the Nazis would commit, it would not be outweighed by the larger number.
Right. The symmetry breaker between that trigger example. So, like, I can just grant that a vegan would say, yes, I will kill all the Jews, right? The symmetry breaker
Nazis.
between. Oh, sorry. God damn it. So,
I'm going to clip that.
oh my God. So, the symmetry breaker here would be that the vegan in that calculation is looking at humans differently as a moral agent, right? But the animal is more like a hurricane killing a bunch of people. So the reason why it's justified in killing more people, more numbers, more beings, is because of the viciousness of the act. But a lion is not acting vicious when it eats. So it's disanalogous in that sense that when we're making an appraisal, a moral judgment of Germany versus Jewish people, then that is having some punishment baked into the moral agents, which are the Germans. Versus the lion, we don't hold the lion accountable in the same way. So if you're just given, like, if you change the hypothetical to, okay, would you kill 1 billion lions to save 100 mice? people would probably say no. They wouldn't pull that trigger.
Yeah, that's true. But the question is, why is it the case that I agree that there is an asymmetry here, but the question is, do people care about the fact that the Nazis are doing this consciously, or do they care about the fact that the lion doesn't have an alternative and he would have to starve otherwise? What do you think is more important here? Because there are actually two asymmetries here.
Yeah, I think that the way the vegan is going to look at the animals is it's sort of like they're both equal, right? So why should they make a choice over the other one? Some vegans are going to say, well, they're the causal agent, so we should kill the causal agent. But I think that's unsatisfactory to a lot of people, and it seems like a very niche view to those who listen to like Avi and sort of follow and don't have a proper response to what Avi is saying.
So they would you say they would behave the same in the case of humans and animals? That's I don't understand, because
No,
then they
I'm
would
saying
also
they're
kill
gonna.
the lions, right?
No, they're going to look at it differently, in my view.
Okay, but is it the moral agency, or is it
They're
the fact
looking.
that they have no alternative?
No. What's different is there's no moral difference between the gazelle and the lion. So they're looking at the gazelle and the lion in the same moral way. They have the same right. And they don't have a good way of cashing out that conflict of rights other than the causal agent. But because it's not a moral agent, the causal agency is inert.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah. So my view is that broadly vegans are going to look at the gazelle and lion with the same moral valuation. They're going to not find a good reason to kill one over the other that's really motivating, unless they're the kind of person who like really listens to Avi, follows AY and all of that, and then they hear, oh, causal agent, and they think causal agent has some thrust, but it doesn't. If it's just a causal agent, then like, you know, we could just move it to a different causal agent there when it comes to the deaths, for example, and try and push a button for that. Like, there's no real reason for us to push the button for the animals when we can like change the hypothetical to, okay, let's push a button and drop lab meat so predators can just eat everything, right? Eat all this lab meat. They won't go hunting gazelle anymore. There's no real difference there.
So just to be clear, we are not talking about whether vegans would press the button. We're talking about whether vegans would be committed to press the button based on other
their values,
their ethical views, right? So I agree that besides from some fringe vegans who follow Avi and Ask Yourself, they would probably just say I think predator culling is a fringe position for vegans, of course, right? And so,
right, but
yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just sort of probably going to say what you were about to say, which is that they should be pressing the button as a consequence of their values, right?
Exactly, yeah. And okay, so I think so what you're basically saying is, because it's it's the same thing whether the lion kills the gazelle or whether we kill the lion, it's both equally bad. One thing has to die or has to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vegan would just be indifferent between those two things. But the point is that in the hypothetical, we are painlessly killing the lion, number one. And number two, after, painfully eating the gazelle, the lion is gonna go on and eat more gazelles. So I think the hypothetical is much, has much less force if we look at the single lion, because if we kill a single lion, we don't stop this suffering. But if we kill all bred animals, then we live from now on forever in a world where there are no bred animals, or at least for a very long time, because through evolution,
but then
maybe
you've just created a different kind of suffering, right? So now you get overpopulation, and instead of a deer or a gazelle being eaten alive, and they're not even eaten alive by lions, by the way. That's that's factually incorrect.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
it's
That's true.
something.
I agree. Yeah. Lions kill
That's something
the
that
prey, but
like
there's
yeah
other
yeah
stuff that yeah.
yeah of course. Like this idea that they're eaten alive, that to me just seems kind of like a rhetorical strategy that sophists use to try and make people feel bad. But what's actually
But you
happening
could
is
wait. We
well
could
I,
just take a different animal that does eat the prey alive, right?
sure, but yeah,
Like
but
the bear, for example.
that's the animal in the example. There are animals that eat other animals alive. Like birds are cruel.
Yeah.
Anyways, the point I'm making though is that you've changed the nature of suffering. So now you don't have a wild animal predation problem. Now you have a wild animal overpopulation, deforestation, massive starvation problem. You have way more animals with disabilities living lives that they would otherwise be killed from when they're young. So they would be living longer lives with greater suffering than if the wild predators were there in the first place. So the vegan being aware of that fact, and if they're doing this based on suffering, would not push the button because pushing the button would cause greater suffering. So really, it just comes down to
Yeah.
like an empirical question for the vegan there, right? Like, which one do they think is worse? And that isn't really cashed out by their values, right? Like, we can't look at their values to determine if they're going to say, like, well, empirically, killing the predators is better or leaving the predators is better. You know, that sort of seems like a lot of speculation. And so you can bring in studies for things like that. You know, that's sort of like what Avi tries to do, is bringing in these studies. And then those who are on the ecology side of things try to bring in counter studies. But really, if the question is like, what's going to be worse? What's going to cause greater suffering? It
Yeah.
seems like that kind of dials down
I
into the
agree.
empirics of it.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And yeah, so I concede that point. But if you're fine with that, I would then change the hypothetical just to see where we can push this. So I agree with you that vegans are not committed because there is the empirical question whether this is produces more or less suffering. So,
Yeah.
but what if in the hypothetical we press the button, we instantly kill all predator animals, and simultaneously we have some kind of automatic population control for non-predatory animals to not run into this problem? Would you then say, like, I agree that this is like a a very
Like birth
far-fetched
control, for
hypothetical, but
example.
just yeah,
Like birth control or something like that.
but let's just say fully automatic at no cost or something, so only every deer can have like 2 kids or something crazy. But
Right. Well, I guess the question is like, okay, well, why can we use, I mean, this is not the hypothetical you presented to me, right?
no, of course, yeah, I conceded that. I conceded the first point, so
No, that's
you
not what I
changed
mean
your
to
mind.
say.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I mean to say, but I mean to say like the the hypothetical you're presenting now, I have a question about it. And
Hmm.
it might come off as bad faith not answering the hypothetical in the first instance. But my question about the hypothetical is, why can we use birth control on herbivores, but we can't use birth control on lions, on the predators?
Um. Okay. I mean, it's a fantasy world, but you're right. I could just say, what if we press a button, we neuter all predator animals, and we have a
Yeah,
system of birth control or some form of population control for non-predator animals. Right? This is
yeah.
just fine with me. I think this is at the very least a position a vegan should be committed to, or most vegans agree. Of course, you can have any kind of normative view, but what do you think about that for yourself and for the average vegan?
I mean, if if the hypothetical is getting dialed down farther and farther, where it's like push a button and end wild animal suffering versus not end it, the vegan's going to end it. And then if we back up from that hypothetical and get closer and closer to push the button to kill predators, there's probably going to be some spectrum where we lose a little bit of vegans as we get closer to that button. And I guess the where I need to change your mind is that from your point of view, there's going to be more vegans pushing that button as we get closer, and from my point of view, there's going to be less vegans pushing that button. Is that right?
No, I already conceded. You've changed my view on the original proposition. I'm just wondering now. This is what I conceded before when I said I conceded.
I see.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering now. How far can we
Yeah.
dial it down so we can agree on what most vegan would agree on.
So present the hypothetical again. Like, are you asking like would a vegan want to use?
Push a button.
Just to answer your question broadly, not like through a hypothetical, and hopefully this answers the hypothetical. I think that most vegans, given a practical way of ending wild animal suffering, that would include like population control with something like birth control, they would do it, or something like a type of forest management where they're feeding the predators so that they're not feeding off of the wild animals. They would probably do it. Or maybe having sections of the forest where they're separated and having greater control. I do think that a vegan would be logically entailed in some way to respond to wild animal suffering, if that's sort of what you're asking. While like a non-vegan wouldn't necessarily be.
I mean, you're right. That answers it for the most part. We don't have to get into specific hypotheticals because, I mean, as you said, it's just a spectrum, and as we make it, more extreme, we're just gonna lose some part of the vegan, and then it's not really interesting. What is the exact fraction that would agree to this? Now, yeah, I think you've changed your mind. So just to recap, whether I let me think about whether I still agree. So what you're saying is that whether killing all predators actually reduces, or actually leads to a better outcome, whatever your ethical view is just an empirical question because it depends on how would the ecosystem respond to that.
Yeah.
And you can just reject it on that basis. You can just say, and I think it's very plausible that this would not have a. Yeah, I mean, Avi has this stud, or no, was it Avi? No, I think
probably Avi.
And but it was Megan Gaines. He mentioned like there's only a single study that shows that predatory. Or no, never mind. There's like this case in some wildlife park where they introduced wolves.
Yellowstone. Yeah,
Yellowstone. And there's like this video which claims that this, stabilized the ecosystem, but this is like a hoax or something. In fact, it had basically no effect. Are you aware of this topic or of the study?
Yeah. And my understanding of that study is that it had an effect. But when they say it has no effect, they're sort of referring to like it doesn't have the effect claimed.
Claimed in the video.
Yeah. So I think it's somewhere in between, right? Like the video is obviously exaggerating.
Yeah.
And I think the study is not a slam dunk, right? For either side, really. There's another study that, do you know Beyond? The user Beyond?
No? What is it? A user?
Yeah, he's in AY. He was a mod in AY ages ago. I don't know if he still is. Goes by Beyond. Sometimes goes by Slayers. Other times.
Is he in here as well?
Every now and again. But he's been in pretty rarely. But anyways, he shared a study because sometimes he'll like do kind of devil's advocacy where he'll pretend to be a non-vegan. And he brought in this study where they reintroduced hunting on an island outside of Vancouver. I think Vancouver Island, actually. Not deer, but hunters, humans. And it improved the ecology by reducing the deer population. So there are studies out there, not just the Yellowstone one, but like where they look at different factors. One being, I need to find that study. I don't have it on hand. I can try and find it for you. But where they introduced deer hunters back into that ecosystem, and things improved.
I mean, it's not surprising, right? Because this is anyways like the common belief, I would say. It's just that, then vegans say that, or at least this Ask Yourself crew claims that this is not the case, and so if you say there's something on that, I trust you. I'm not that into this whole topic, and you convinced me on this point.
Sweet. Well, thank you for the discussion. I have to go back to lunch. I want to have another one with you with our ethical, like virtue ethics.
Yeah, we definitely have to do this sometime. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure.
Veganism then in the end, right?